Back here to this NLL Thursday edition of the AM Drive, and we are presented by Fanatics. The best teams, the best leagues, every daily deal that you can get your hands on is right there at Fanatics. But visit MikeandAaronDrive.com and click the F.
What's up, Mr. Andy Lindahl? Welcome to the show today.
Guys, how are we?
Okay, good. I was scared to be there for... Cool. All right, Andy, you're the voice of the Colorado Mammoth and the co-host of Kreckman and Lindahl on the radio. So let's start off with a day in the life of Andy Lindahl. You are play-by-play for the Mammoth. Is NLL your only forte? Because your Twitter profile picture is a Colorado football game interview.
No, actually, I host an afternoon drive radio show on the station that has the Avalanche and the Denver Nuggets here in town. That's Altitude 92.5. So I do that every day for 4 hours. Matter of fact, that game that you guys saw Friday night, we were a little bit stressed because I can't get out of the radio, even though it's technically all the same company, because the radio station I work at, our owner, Stan Kroenke, owns the Mammoth. And but not everybody plays well together all the time. So I had to get done with my radio show. I had to hustle from a bar we were doing a remote at to get over to the arena to the game. And I'll be doing the same thing tomorrow night against Vancouver. And I got to get out of a place in the mountains and back down to the city in time to call this game. So it's been interesting. But I do the Mammoth. I did the Broncos for over a decade. I was able to cover both their Super Bowl Manning. I was the sideline reporter at, let's see, I do the buff side, what the profile picture is. It's me getting a chance to talk to one of the receivers who was one of my favorite guys last year after one of their very few victories. But I've actually done more football. I played lacrosse for 30 years, coached lacrosse for 6 or 7 now. So lacrosse is my true love as far as sports, but my most extensive experience comes from talk shows and.
That's awesome. Go ahead.
Andy, you talked about this situation here with you. You're the do-it-all here in Denver sports media, and how did you find your role in what could be a saturated market? I know you grew up rooting for the Broncos. I read a little bit about you here before the show, and that stems from your parents. And what did you do to kind of work hard to carve out your role in Denver sports media?
I'm a unique story. I started actually as a producer. And normally if you go, and this is what sometimes the young folks don't get told, which is unfair. If you head in the producer's route, you normally end up as a program director, we call them, or like the boss, the management side of things. You don't become the on-air folks, the talent, as they like to say. Although most of us kind of laugh at the word talent, but that's what they label us. So I was working with Mark Schlereth right after he retired from the Denver Broncos on a show that he hosted, and it was with his former teammates, David Diaz-Infante. They both were part of those great Super Bowl teams with the Broncos in the 90s. And Mark, is pretty famous for having the 30 knee surgeries and all that kind of stuff. He was constantly getting surgery. And so when I got into radio, I got into it while I was in college. I had an internship, very key if you can get them. Here in the States, we have a problem. There was a case long ago where a group of students sued the state of New York, sued a college in particular, for not getting accreditation for doing what was an internship. They didn't get paid, and they didn't get college credit like they were supposed to. It was a total scam. I felt bad for the students. But unfortunately, their gain, as they won some money out of this case, forced paid internships throughout our industry. I did 2 free internships and then got hired by the station I was working at. I gave them 6 free months of work, but it worked out as a 6-month job interview. Because now you've got to pay interns and the rules have changed drastically because of this landmark case. It really hurts young folks trying to get in and show people, hey, I've got what it takes, because that's what happened with me. My first job, I was working a nighttime show that was 7 to 10 our afternoon show on KOA where the Broncos are broadcasted. This is back in 2000, I guess. Their producer quit. And since I was doing the show after that, I just said, this is like mid-October. I was like, look, I could use the money, especially come Christmas time, because you're not going to make a lot when you start out in this thing. You may never make a lot in radio, but we love what we do. So anyway, I just said, hey, look, I'll take it over. I took it over. A guy named Scott Hastings, who now does the Nuggets colors. He was a member of the Detroit Pistons Bad Boys. He said, give this guy a chance. I like him. They were doing a national search to fill the job because this show was a top 5 in Denver at the time. Scott's partner was Dave Logan, the voice of the Broncos. And he was a Cleveland Brown back in the day, too. Very famous Colorado athlete. And they both were just like, let him have the job. He's working hard. But again, wouldn't have been in the position to even get that break had I not had the internship, because I interned for those guys for 6 months. So anyway, I was on my way to management, and then I started doing this show with Mark Schlereth after he retired because we became buddies. And Mark was on ESPN. Mark had to go and do the ESPN hits on NFL Live. So instead of getting fill-in hosts, I just was like, look, man, I'm just going to host the show when he's out. And again, because radio's cheap, they're like, fine, we can't pay people to fill in for this guy. So that's kind of how I got my break and my crossover into doing talk shows. And then soon after that, I started doing the Broncos sideline. I want to say, I guess my first sideline days were in 2008, and I was with the team through 2017. And then we were doing this all Broncos station afterwards. It just failed miserably. And then I got let go. You're going to get fired in radio. You better get ready for that. So I got fired in radio, got picked up by this station here 3 months later. Having a good time with the guy that I work with now. Getting into the Mammoth is an interesting deal because I'm one of the few guys in town here in Denver. I mean, I'm wearing right now my Vista Boys where I coach. I played. There weren't a lot of media guys in Denver that actually played lacrosse. And we had the Outlaws roll through along with the Mammoth. And I first started working the sidelines of Outlaws games. And it just was easy for me because I get the game because I play. Now, again, the indoor stuff, you may have heard me mention it on the broadcast. Bob Hamley and Steve Govett and, John Grant Jr. I've had guys teach me the subtleties of the differences between the two sports. You'll oftentimes hear me and my buddy Jamie Shuchuk, who I do the broadcast with, who we may have to pair you guys up with, but he and I always have a little joke about the face-off wins because I faced off. Face-offs, they're a huge deal in field lacrosse. They're not as big a deal, according to most guys, for example, in the indoor league. They don't feel like it leads to the kind of runs it can lead to in the field game. So I've gotten to do a lot. I did the Outlaws broadcast for a number of years until I started traveling. I was the Mammoth color analyst for about 8 or 9 years. There are a number of times where I left that Bronco game where Raheem Moore had the bad play and blew it for Peyton Manning in his first year. I literally left this stadium and went to a Mammoth playoff. I remember the Tebow game. I was trying to call the Mammoth game with Josh Gross, who now works for the San Diego Seals, while the Patriots were crushing Tebow and the Broncos after the Demaryius Thomas touchdown. When I first started doing the Bronco games, I only did the home games because our PA guy, Alan Roach, who does the Olympics and everything else, he used to go on the road, but he would be PA for the Broncos in the home, at home. So I only had to do the home games, so it was great. But I traveled with the team for about 4 or 5 years and, lived every minute of their Super Bowl 50 year. And as you said, being a Bronco fan, it was incredible. I became really good friends with a girl who worked with me. She's a former Bronco cheerleader named Romy Bean. We were doing a show together. She was on the sidelines, still cheerleading. She was the last person I saw before I had to get on the field as they pulled up the rope. She's a Denver native too. Her family's got great connections. That was a pretty special moment because we both were Denver kids, and we were about to go hang out with them as they raised the trophy and then, the party's into the night. So that was probably my most special moment, but it's been incredible having, I grew up in Denver where lacrosse didn't mean anything to anybody. It always touches me to see where the game's gone because, we're in Ball Arena now, where the Avs play, where the Nuggets play.
Right.
It's been a little slow for the crowds to come back, but they used to get 16,000 there.
Ooh.
Wow.
And when I was playing in high school, our parents barely showed up. We were
Right.
lucky to get 5 people at a game, I played in Vail where we had 5,000 people watching us one year with one of my teams. I got to play the Gate brothers and Marichek and, Quint Kesnick and all these. That's probably my coolest lacrosse experience. But to see the DU Pioneers be so dominant, to see the Mammoth be so important, I'm very sad the Outlaws left because I love the field game. Not as big a fan of the PLL concept, the Premier Lacrosse League, because I liked it when the Mammoth had 7-8 home games. I used to teach at a media school, and I'd take the students out. I have a number of kids that got to go and get their first media experience on the field with the Outlaws, getting a chance to talk to John Grant Jr., a legend in his own game.
Right.
And the lacrosse players are so much more chill than the baseball or the football guys.
I agree.
It was a great experience for everybody that I wish the league was still around, but that's kind of the nutshell of what I've done in my career.
Well, that was awesome. I love the wealth of information. That was amazing to hear all those stories. That was just one time, and I appreciate that. I do have to ask you, speaking of the Mammoth, about this past game. You mentioned it a little bit. It's very rarely do you see a team that's like got 14 goals that I've seen in the NLL, and they get blown out because another team has scored 20. That was just incredible. It was in Colorado, which I love. I think you guys have one of the best home advantages that I've seen from the ESPN Plus side of things. Take me through that game. How do you balance not like screaming your heart out like they scored again? Because I was on Twitter like, when does this end? How do you manage to do that?
Well, I mean, you ride the game. I think that's where playing it helps, right?
Right.
Because, now look, was I some high level lacrosse player? I'm not trying to say that I was. I wasn't. But I played the game. I've coached the game. I felt it, and I feel like when you've been around it, you kind of know, you try to tell people, look, the first goal is not the biggest deal in a lacrosse game. Now, sometimes in the indoor league, you get a little bit more of a, lower scoring game like you're referring to. To your point, that game the other night looked like an out, where the middies dominate and there's just a ton of scoring and they had the 2-point line and all that other stuff. So that was a very unusual game, especially with Dylan Ward playing. Dylan Ward is one of the great goalies in the league, and Demude, Demude had kind of a rough game. The Panther City goalie had a bit of a rough game going into that the week before, even though they won.
Right.
So we weren't exactly expecting a shootout, but you got it, and you just go with it. I mean, I guess I love the game, so I hope that helps. This sport has meant everything to me. Lacrosse has, because I think it's helped me be tough enough mentally to make it in a business where people are trying to backstab you, and you don't always have people looking out for you and things like that. And I take a lot of the experiences I had from the tough times in lacrosse to help me get through just life sometimes. But my love for the game, I hope, helps me feel it out. It's a game like that's fun. I almost feel like I don't think I did anything for that. That game was just so good. You earn your money in crappy games. You earn the money when you don't have anything going on and nobody can seem to do much. Right? Like we had an 8-4 game or a 9-4 game earlier in the year against Vancouver, who they're going to face again tomorrow night. And look, Alex Bouquet is on the Warriors, and he used to play here. And Bouquet is a kind of a urban legend, a local legend here in Colorado, because he backed up Dylan Ward, and there was a game where he came out of the net and just trucked some guy. And it was on all the highlight films and sizzle reels we put up before the game forever. And so, Bouquet is a fun figure, but man, nobody was scoring and nothing was going on. And, you guys, maybe I called high school football a low level of it back in the day, where both teams ran these same basic running offenses, and you're seeing the same play every time. And there's not really much to describe because it looks like what we just watched for the last 5 straight plays. That's where you kind of earn your money to try to be entertaining. The game the other night was so phenomenal. I wish it could have been on ESPN, as some of these games are,
Yes.
because that's that's the kind of game that I think wins the fans when you see something as fun as that.
Absolutely. Showcases the sport to the fullest because, like you said, the fans love offense. Talking to Andy Lindahl here, voice of the Colorado Mammoth and obviously co-host of Kreckman and Lindahl, 2 to 6 on the 92.5 altitude. Last question we're going to ask you here. The Mammoth have a double header this weekend, Friday and then Saturday, one at home and then one in San Diego. Expectations for the Mammoth this weekend as they go up against two teams that are, fighting for wins. One of them being Vancouver, and the other one obviously being the division leader in San Diego.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I got to go back to my app here on my phone because this has been such a crazy week in Denver. We had the Russell Wilson press conference yesterday.
Oh,
The Rockies signed Chris Bryant. The Avs traded for they've traded for a couple of grinders that they desperately need if they're going to be physical enough in the playoffs. We're expecting a Claude Giroux, possibly a Patrick Kane trade in the next couple of days. And of course, the Mammoth made some trades. So
I love this.
as I try to keep up with everybody, I'm gonna go back. Let me go get the names. I know they traded first off for Tyson Gibson, and Tyler Digby was a guy. Tyler was a real leader on this team. Like one of the guys the Mammoth gave up. Of course, they sent him off to New York, I believe. I'm trying to look for the trade details. I know they sent a bunch of picks, but Digby's going to be the centerpiece of that trade that they sent off to the Riptide. Digby's a good player, former Canadian football player, physical dude. I think they were really counting on a lot from Digby. He was an assistant captain for the team. And I think the reason why he was able to get moved is Zed Williams really has come into his own, and they kind of play that lower crease attackman kind of plays position for the Mammoth, playing off the shooter Ryan Lee up top, the two righties. So looking at Gibson's sort of bubblegum card, if you will, as best you can, Tyson Gibson, it's looks like he's going to add a little bit of scoring. I think he's probably going to add a little bit of speed. He's younger. He was the first overall pick for the Riptide. So I'm really, really curious to see what he brings to this. And then Anthony Jochum, who they also acquired in a trade. Man, the defense was rough last week, and I think Robert Hope, the Mammoth captain, was in the box a couple of times. He got really frustrated. Hope is a really chill dude. So I was kind of thrown off seeing Hope go to the box a couple of times. We had a case where John Gallant, the former assistant captain the former captain, I should say, of the Mammoth, is between the benches for us. And Gallant was even saying Ward was getting in people's grills a little bit. So I think there was clear frustration with the defense. I think both these guys are going to play. What that loss, now Vancouver lost last week too. So the Friday night game is going to be a little bit interesting because Vancouver's social media wasn't even trying to hide that this is kind of a crappy game and we're not doing anything against
That was
Toronto.
funny.
So we'll have to see. Both teams need a bounce back. The Seals, of course, are the class of the Western Conference. So the Mammoth need to take care of business Friday night. They have to. You don't want Panther City's getting on a roll. They may have a bunch of young guys not a lot of people are too familiar with, and a lot of their best players are not even in the NLL yet. They're still in college. They're really building something down there. I'm not surprised to see Bob Hamley doing that because he's such a good guy for the league. But they've got to get this one against Vancouver. Then you hope you don't, not too much jet lag. There's been some snow here, but it's mainly a wet storm. I don't think it's going to affect travel for Vancouver, or it shouldn't affect the Mammoth getting out. But you don't want to have one of these planes, trains, and automobiles trips from Denver to San Diego and get in there and you're kind of tired and, whatever. You hope they can send a little bit of a message because it's going to be big, these matchups between San Diego and Colorado down the stretch. But Colorado's got to get this one Friday. They've got to wash out what we saw. A fun game for us to watch. I can tell you, Pat Coyle was probably chewing bricks in the locker room when it was done. So it's a big weekend for the Mammoth.
Agreed.
This has been awesome, Andy. I appreciate all the insight. I appreciate the breakdown of those games because I might have to make some bets on BetMGM now that you say all that stuff.
I'm not allowed to talk to you, I'm afraid, fellas. Sorry about that.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Andy.
Guys, have a good one. Thanks.
You too.